Hi, this is Debbie and thank you for joining me today as I get ready for Easter with this cute bunny card. I'm going to start with a doodle egg background from SSS Stamp. This is a large cling mount stamp with a fun overlapping Easter egg pattern which I thought would look great white heat embossed and then watercoloured. I've placed a piece of hot pressed watercolour card in the MISTI. I've taken out the padded mat from the base to allow for the extra room needed for a cling stamp. I'm using a hot press watercolour paper as its smooth surface will give the best impression with this detailed image. I treated the card with a powder tool and then stamped the image a couple of times with clear embossing ink. This is a clear sticky ink that the embossing powder will stick to, and the powder tool I used at the beginning will hopefully prevent stray embossing powder sticking elsewhere. I sprinkled over white embossing powder and then heat set. I've taped the panel to a stiff board with 3M blue painter's tape. This will help prevent the card from warping when I add the water and paint, and the blue tape has a mild adhesive which means it will lift when I'm done painting without damaging the surface of the paper. The paints I'm using are from Daniel Smith and I'm trying out a new palette that Christina Werner recommended recently. This is the Bulletproof palette from Magello and I'll leave all the links down in the description below. And the surface of this palette is not supposed to stain like most plastic palettes do, which means that you can see your colours clearer. I added a wash of clear water to the card with a size 24 Vinci flat brush. One of the great properties of watercolours is that they spread and blend into a layer of water. This is known as the wet on wet technique and results in softly blended colours without harsh transitions. Before I started mixing colours, you may have noticed me spraying the paints with a mini mister. This is a great way to prime your paints before using them. The mist of water moistens the paints so that it's easy to pick up the colour. While the paper was wet, I added a rainbow of soft spring-like colours, from a peachy pink in the lower left corner, through a warm yellow to a spring green, and finishing in the top right with a lovely turquoise. The raised lines of the heat embossing cause the paint to puddle in the wells of the image, and as the paint dries, results in different gradients of colour. I speeded up the drying process by gently moving a heat tool over the surface, and then went back in with a second layer of paint. While this second layer of paint was still wet, I added sterling silver Finetec paint. As this mixed with the Daniel Smith colours, it added a subtle sparkle, and as a result the colours softened slightly too. To increase the sparkle further, I splattered the now dry panel with a solution of perfect pearls. It's hard on camera to see the sparkle, but in real life the panel is now a rainbow of sparkly sherbet colours. I'm going to use the watercolour background behind a die-cut oval. I used the largest of the stitched oval dies from SSS Stamp. I ran a piece of ivory card through the die cutting machine. I then trimmed the sides of the panel slightly so that it was 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, the size of an A2 card. And then I trimmed the watercolour panel so that it was just slightly smaller than the die cut oval piece and would sit nicely behind it without peeking out around the edges. I added a generous amount of foam adhesive to the back of the oval panel. I think it's particularly important to ensure this panel is well supported, as it's quite narrow around the edges and could easily get squished going through the mail. I then added the watercolour panel on top of the foam adhesive so that when viewed from the front you get the impression of an Easter egg with all the sparkly pastel details of the doodle egg background inset below. Now it's time to dress up this Easter egg, and as the owner of 2 rabbits I had to use the O Bunny stamp and die set from SSS Stamp. Initially I chose a colour scheme of Rosy Cheeks, Clementine and Willow, but found the latter two to be too strong for this softly coloured card. Instead, I chose Duckling and Spring Rain to complete the trio of bunnies. I trimmed the matching O Bunny die from its neighbours with tin snips and then kept it in place over the image with washi tape before running it through the die cutting machine. I added a double layer of foam adhesive to the back of the rabbits so that they stood proud of the background, and then it was time to add some fluffy white tails to the bunnies with Debby's pom-poms. I found the easiest way to attach the tails was with a glue dot. For the sentiment for this card, I placed a piece of slate card in the mini MISTI and treated it with a powder tool before stamping a couple of phrases from the O Bunny set in clear embossing ink, sprinkling with white embossing powder and heat setting. I used a scalpel and a clear ruler with a metal edge to trim the sentiment piece to a banner. I then added foam adhesive to the back of the panel and used a T-square ruler to ensure I placed the sentiment on the card front straight. I then removed the foam adhesive backers from the bunnies and lined them up on top of the sentiment. I found it easiest to work out the placement of the rabbits by adhering the outer 2 bunnies first and then centering the yellow bunny in the gap in the middle. I added foam adhesive to the back of the panel and then added this to a Nina Desert Storm card base I'd cut to be slightly larger at 4.5 by 5 3/4 inches. I added a few clear Pretty Pink Posh droplets with Ranger Multimedia Matte, and that completes this sweet Easter card with heat embossed background resisting a watercolour wash, and then a trio of cute bunnies and sweet sentiment. I'll leave links in the YouTube description below to the products that I've used today, as well as a link to the coordinating blog post over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you'd subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.